right, great.
This is Eddie he from Ontario, and this is July 18th, and this is our meeting about our aquatic management plan.
Thanks, John. So what this presentation is going to be is hopefully an educational opportunity for you guys to learn what we did as a part of the lake management planning process, and then transition into what is possibly going to happen next. And John alluded to that, and I'm going to kind of give a little bit more detail about exactly what that entails. But to start, we're going to go over what the lake management plan was. And move this out of the way so everybody can see me a little better. The first thing we do is we collect a bunch of data. Some of that data has been collected over the years in the form of historic data that's available to us. Other data we collect ourselves for Berry Lake that happened in 2014. Then we take that data and we worked with a planning committee put together by the Berry Lake Property Owners Association, and we created a long-term and hopefully usable plan. So I'm going to go through from the back to the front. We're going to start with conclusions, and then I'm going to give you some information of how we came up with these conclusions. So, the water quality in Berry Lake is good for a lake of this type. It has a moderate amount of historic data that's kind of sparse, and it was hard to determine if there was any trends available. The water quality may fluctuate from year to year, and we know that occurs. Some years it's a little bit greener, some years less. And water levels, of course, change, and that influences it. This right here will give you a small snapshot of some of the data that we're working on. This isn't from your lake, this is just a lake. So we have something called Secchi disc. It's a circular disc that gets dropped in the water, and you measure how far down you can see it, and it helps us understand how clear the water is. So imagine this is the water surface. In April, it's the highest, and then usually over the course of the summer, it gets a little less clear. Why is that? Because you have things like chlorophyll A, which is really algae, the green pigment in plants and algae, increases over the course of the year. So those are kind of hand in hand. And I wanted to show you that, guys, this, just so you understand some of the next figures that we show you, that usually water clarity is highest in the spring and kind of gets a little bit less clear as the summer progresses. So when we looked at the available data from your lake for phosphorus, this is what we came up with. You can see we have blue bar charts, which is during the open water season, growing season, anytime from ice out to ice out. And then we have summer, just June, July, and August. And really, because there's so much noise on the sides with in spring, in late fall, June, July, and August are our best data to compare. So when we look here at 2014, which is a bunch of water quality that Ontario collected, you can see that this right here was how much phosphorus we had in the lake. And compared to other lakes like Berry Lake, you can see we're right in line. And other lakes in this region, heck, we have a lot less phosphorus. That's good. Why is that good? Because more phosphorus means more algae or more plants. So if you are fertilizing your lawn and any of that phosphorus gets in the lake, that just made more plants and more algae in your lake. And we did a bunch of different studies. They're all detailed in the management plan, but we've confirmed that for your lake. So we know that we need to limit the amount of phosphorus in your lake if we want to keep the water clarity clear. I'll also look at something called chlorophyll A, which is that green pigment. And just as you can see, over time, we have, the data's a little bit spotty, it's here and there, but still all within that good to excellent range, right in line, if not just a little bit less than other lakes that are like Berry Lake, seepage lakes that don't really have tributaries or outflows. Here is the Secchi disc, which is your water clarity. And remember again, this is the water surface, and this is how far down you can see that. And you can see that the water clarity does change from year to year, but we're in that good to excellent. range. We do have some missing years, and that was a little bit hard for us to tell if there was changes over time. So one of the things that we can do is we can take all this information together into something called a trophic state index. And what that means is your lake highly productive or eutrophic, or low productivity, oligotrophic? Now this would be like your fishing lakes in Canada, big deep lakes, lots of boulders, that type of thing. Your eutrophic lake, well, we have Shawano Lake right next door, we know what that looks like. So you guys fall, right here is all of the data kind of combined right here. And you can see that you're kind of closer to that lower productivity range. And I think you guys know that. Your water clarity is good. There's not a lot of algae in the water. Most of your production or growth is in the form of plants. And you guys, in some areas, do have a lot of plants. And that helps to also clear up the water because it uses that nutrient so that the algae can't use it. We also know that water levels fluctuate quite a bit on Berry Lake. Very common for seepage lakes, lakes that don't have an inlet or outflow. The USGS installed a continuous water level monitoring station in the spring of 2013. And I just pulled this data off yesterday, and you can see that water levels are, you know, 1.5 feet higher than when it was installed. Some of you that I got a chance to speak with mentioned that it's some of the highest that you've seen since you've owned your property there. That obviously affects water quality, that affects plant growth. Some of you folks were talking about the Eurasian water milfoil, and I suspect that it's just all still there. It's just less visible to you, which is good, I guess, if it's from a aesthetic purpose. So the committee developed some management goals in terms of water quality. What do we want to do? The goal is to maintain that water quality condition. How are we going to meet that goal? Well, one of the actions is to continue to monitor the water quality in the lake through the Citizens Lake Monitoring Network. One of the issues with the data is that it's very sparse and it's incomplete, and there's we need to have some refreshment of the volunteer to make sure we can get commitment to collect good water quality moving forward. And that's something that the committee has taken up. Moving past water quality. And if you want to learn more about the water quality, there's pages and pages and pages in your management plan that is also linked on the website. Overall, the watershed is in good condition. The watershed contains a variety of different land covers. Now when I say the watershed, I mean the land that if you dropped water on it would go down into a gully or a ditch and eventually make it into Berry Lake. A watershed that if a water droplet was a little bit further away, it would flow, say, into Shawano Lake and not into Berry Lake. So that's what we mean when we say watershed. The type of land that's on the watershed influences what type of nutrients, mainly phosphorus, end up in your lake. And the watershed contains a variety of land cover types. Think of things like forest or wetland or rural residential like our properties around the lake, or agriculture. So there's a variety of them. The lack of a tributary suggests that a lot of the water never actually reaches Berry Lake. It goes through the groundwater and gets into the lake through groundwater. And during that process, a lot of the nutrients are filtered out. If there was more water coming in, it would eventually erode something, a stream inlet, and be constantly flowing. And the shoreland zone, so all of our properties around the lake, that's probably right now posing the biggest threat to the water clarity, water quality of Berry Lake. And we went through this ad nauseum within our committee meetings, and it's kind of a painful truth, but what we do on our shoreline practices really has the ability to impact a lake like Berry Lake. And I'm going to go through a little bit of why that is. So everybody likes maps. Here is the lake, and this red line, if you can see it, is the watershed boundary. This means if water dropped here, it would flow here. If water dropped here, it would go someplace else. And The watershed is about 1,200 acres, or for every acre of lake, there's 5 acres of land that drains to it. That's a small ratio, 5 to 1. Think of some of your impoundments that have tributaries. They're thousands to 1. You guys are only 5 to 1, so every acre has a very big influence on the lake itself. What is this guy talking about? Well, let me explain a little bit more. Okay, these are the different land cover types that we can put the land cover on of your lake in. Forest, wetlands, rural residential, all the way up to high density urban. You know, think of Milwaukee or something of that nature. We know through a modeling procedure that forest delivers the least amount of phosphorus to a lake. Why? Because all those roots and all that undergrowth helps suck the nutrients down into the water. Think of the deeper the roots, the more phosphorus it's going to be able to suck up and not let get to your lake. We go up to something like row crops. I mean, corn roots are only this deep, and it's mostly dirt. Most of the nutrients flow right off. Most of the water flows right off. And we know in some of our urban settings, it's all hardscape. It flows off. It doesn't let anything percolate in and get rid of those nutrients. So let me go back to here. We know that forest has the least negative impact on the lake, and this up here has the most negative impact. So let's look at your lake. These are the land cover types for Berry Lake. You can see some agricultural, some pasture. That might change from year to year in cyclic rotation. We have a lot of forest. We have some forested wetlands and wetlands in here. And then, of course, we have what every lake has is the rural residential, the lake properties. This is the breakdown of what that ends up being. In terms of 100%, there is actually 44%, almost half of it, is the forest, and 12% is the row crops. And I just want to bring those two to your attention, because when we know these land covers, I just talked about the phosphorus that each one of those gives us. So we can model how much phosphorus would be coming into your lake from those land cover types, and this is what it shows. So even though there's only 12% of Berry Lake's watershed is row crops, it contributes almost 50% of the phosphorus that comes into your lake. We looked at some scenarios. If you took half that forest, half of that row crop, and put it back into forest, you could actually detect clearer water. Think of it the other way. If we allowed more of this forest, which is almost half the watershed that only contributes 15% here, if we allowed more of that to go to row crops, we'd have less clear water. Okay, so right now we would want to make sure that we don't shift the greens and the browns around. Some of these other things we can't help as much. We're not going to really change much of the rural residential. I mean, this is the Berry Lake surface itself, because phosphorus is actually in suspended dust particles, and as it rains, comes down and gets to the lake. We can't do that, so we can't influence that. So our main goal is to make sure browns and greens stay where they are and don't shift towards more browns. Sure.
Where's the row crop again? Can you go back to this?
Sure. So and like I said, some of these may change from year to year, but you can see one of the advantages of Berry Lake is this big wetland complex right here. And if those nutrients go into those wetlands, that wetland can really help to buffer the lake from it. So that's a highly functioning part of your system. One of the issues also with row crops, and that some of us that are close to it understand, is that there's drain tiles. So sometimes, even though the topographic map may look like it drains to your lake, heck, maybe all of this right here drains into this wetland complex because they put a bunch of tunnels and stuff in years ago. So it's not accurate. Think of it as going to the doctor and having a physical. You don't get an MRI right away, you have a physical. This is a physical level look at your watershed. If we saw more pertinent issues, we may investigate something more. But the bottom line with that is it's pretty expensive to look at it. And what we know about your lake right now is that it's in really good condition.
Some of that row crop wasn't there a few years ago.
Probably not. And this row crop is picked up, the data comes from a satellite imagery. So what they do is they shoot different bands of light down and detect how much vegetation is and make some choices. So some of these may or may not always be farm fields, row crops, and sometimes they may be in something like winter wheat, which would actually show up as pasture grass. But it's a good tool for us to understand what influence the land has on our lake, because maybe a lot of us never really thought about it that way. So let's look at the shoreland, okay? I'm gonna take a cup of coffee here in case you guys try to beat me up after showing some of this data, but we have to think about this as cumulative impacts of what we do influence the lake. So all these data that I'm going to show right here are in terms of what does Berry Lake see, what does the ecology of Berry Lake influenced by the shoreline. The shoreline area of a lake is important for buffering. It's the last ditch effort to get those nutrients from not entering the lake. It's also very valuable habitat for our aquatic and terrestrial wildlife. That interface, that's where all the cool stuff is in the lakes. That's where our frogs are. Our dragonflies need emergent vegetation to crawl out and crawl up on in order to live. And it's very important for the health of your lake to have those critters in it. We did a study. We didn't look at it property by property. We don't have parcel data or anything of that nature. We just look at from the lake, we look at the shoreline, we look about 35 feet back from where the traditional water mark is on the lake, and we know it's pretty clear cut. You have from urbanized, green grass, this is urban lawn, urban setting, obviously fertilized and dandelion control, to okay, I just have the bare minimum that I need to be able to use my lakefront property. Now, I'm not saying here, I mean, who's this long-haired hippie kid up here telling me that we need to go here? That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying from the lake's perspective, this is better than this. But knowing that we are part of the equation, we want to use our property, we know that this is probably not going to suffice for most of us. But we can make decisions knowing what the lake thinks, and that's what's important for us now. Perhaps, maybe we don't need all of our frontage to look like this. Maybe we can take half of it and turn it into that. Maybe some people said, I didn't realize that that's having such a negative impact on my lake. Maybe I'll make different decisions. Here's the lake. Here's the study. Okay, red, alarm, green, good. You can kind of see there's also things called seawalls, which we talk about because it's really hard for a critter to get up a seawall. So this is the lake in general terms, and what these data show, notice I quick went away from the map so you didn't have a chance to look at your property. No, that's not, it's better now. The reds and the orange are hard on the lake, okay? Right here we have 14, 16, we have 30% of the lake is in that condition that can be a little tough on the lake. This yellow, I mean, this is probably what, if I had a place on Berry Lake, that's probably what I would be looking for. And then a lot of it, almost 50%, is in the best type. So just as we talked about those row crops before, we could take some of these and shift them to yellow, and we can make sure that these don't get shifted in another direction. That's what would be good for Berry Lake. We also looked at something called coarse woody habitat. It used to be coarse woody debris, or CWD, but something else took that acronym, so now we changed it to coarse woody habitat. It's the trees that fall in the lake, and they provide great shoreline erosion control. They prevent this resuspension of sediments, and it's a preferred habitat of aquatic life. If you're a fisher person and there's a downed tree, you know you're going to cast over by it. Why? Because there's stuff there. Because that's where a lot of the life likes it. There's something called periphyton, which is the algae that grows on stuff. That's all over. That's good stuff for insects to feed upon. It's a hiding place. It's a refugia. It's spawning habitat for some fish. And right now there's tons. When you look at any wood, you'll see tons of frog eggs on them right now this time of year. And how branched it is important. So just a log doesn't really offer as much as a real branched tree. So complexity is important. And what happened, the changing of the logging process, shoreline development, that's in my way, and we get rid of it. And, water levels, usually when water levels get really low, some of that stuff gets high and dry, and it dries out. Then when water levels come back up, it floats away, so we take it out of the lake. So we tried to look at how much this stuff was in the lake. And what we found was we found 5 pieces. So not a very good number. Natural lakes could have as much as 300 pieces per mile. You guys have 1.5 pieces per mile. That's an issue. That's something that your fisheries manager from the DNR, has concerns with. Granted, we're only looking at the stuff that's sticking out of the water. There's probably more down deep. Things like fish cribs used to be popular to try to, create some of this shoreline habitat. However, a lot of fisheries managers have gone away from using fish cribs because it concentrates pressure. It concentrates anglers, it concentrates fish predation, and it doesn't offer much for spawning habitat. So there's a big push towards helping cause shoreline and emergent coarse woody habitat in your lake. So what does that mean? If you got a drowned tree that's not causing problems, leave it there, it's good. If it's causing an issue where it landed, maybe try to move it, but leave it in the lake. If there's parts of the lake that are not developed, keep that stuff there as much as you can. Don't cut down a tree to cause it, because those trees are shading the lake. We just want dead stuff. We'll talk about it in a second, but when you enhance shoreland coarse woody habitat on purpose, you actually cut trees from inside the woods, and then you drag them out on the ice, and then anchor them and put them in spot in the wintertime. On Terra, our company didn't collect any fisheries data. It's something that the Department of Natural Resources does all the fisheries data collection in their study. There was a study conducted in 2007, and I spoke with your fisheries biologist, and within your management plan, we did aggregate some of that information. So in that one document is all this information to help us make decisions. Here's what the study said in 2007. Panfish. The size structure is increasing. You're getting bigger panfish. This was as of 2007, remember, too. Likely result of reduced reproduction levels. What does that mean? That if you have less bluegills in the lake, they're going to be bigger. If you have a lot of bluegills in a lake, they're going to be smaller, because there's only so much stuff in your lake that can make a bluegill. The pie is only so big. Do you want to cut up in a lot of little pieces or less big pieces? That's what fisheries science pretty much boils down to. So because the low water levels, you didn't have a lot of reproduction occurring, that means that the fish that are there were able to get bigger, older. Northern pike, slow growing, and the DNR thought they would benefit from more protective regulations, try to increase the size structure. Northern pike is also helpful for predating or picking off those little bluegills and helping keep that pie in bigger pieces. So it's important to have a good predator population. Largemouth bass, the science is a little confusing, but they found fewer in 2007 than 2003, but they are a little bit on the big side, so that was good. And some of the concerns was the low water levels. That seems to be, at least in the short term, behind us, but that was a problem because some of those wetlandy areas they couldn't get to, and they need those for spawning. And then, we just talked about it. The shoreline development and recreational use on the lake is hard for the fisheries as well. So we just have to be mindful of that and do what we can to help out our fish. And they indicate that they would like to discontinue predator fish stocking until the water levels increase, because they just, the benefit is not worth the cost, is what the department said. So what did the committee come up with? Well, we created a management goal to protect and restore the shoreline condition. And what are we going to do? Well, we're going to investigate restoring some highly developed shoreline areas. And maybe a good place to start, and there's already some discussion in process, is a demonstration site. Put it on somebody's property, we can get some grants for it, and then let people go look at it and see that it's not just old tall grass and unkeptness. It's beautiful, you can have pretty flowers there, you can have the right stuff, and it can really be an asset to your yard that's helpful for the lake. So the first goal would be a nice demonstration site. And like I said, and what's written in the report is there's money that we can get for this. The Department of Natural Resources, when it comes to lake, if there's one thing that they want to push, it's the development of shorelines right now. Not AIS control. They want the shoreline condition is something that they're really pushing. So there's money available. If we want to do it, we can get access to that. We want to protect those areas that are in good condition. You know, there might be an ability to work with private landowners to try to communicate that we want to keep that. You know, work maybe with the Menominee Nation to make sure we keep those areas on that part of the lake in good condition. Taking those areas and changing them over to rural residential is not something that would be good for the lake. Work with private landowners to expand coarse woody habitat in Berry Lake. We would work through the fisheries biologist. There's grants available. It's called a fish sticks program. It's kind of got a fun name to it, but essentially putting some shoreline coarse woody habitat back in the lake, and that'll have good benefits for the fisheries as well as everything else, all the critters and stuff that help us make Berry Lake what it is. So now let's talk about aquatic plants, and it's probably because of their abundance, because we see them, because they're easily sampled. This is something that we put a lot of our survey work into. So this is really going to be the bulk of what data we collected out here. Aquatic plant community. Okay, we raised from good to high. Your aquatic plant community is of high quality. This is not just me saying it. The report goes through a bunch of different ways. I'm going to show one or two because I don't want to, we could talk ad nauseum about how cool your plants are. But they're at high diversity. There's a large number of species, and the species that are present are also of good quality. We have the benefit of being part, this is the last year of the long-term trends Eurasian water milfoil project that the Department of Natural Resources investigated the lake continuously every year and did a survey of the plants, and we have that information. And what that shows is even with the water level changes, even with the increase of Eurasian water milfoil, even in light of doing some herbicide treatments, the aquatic plant community has changed very little over that time period. And I'm not going to show you those data, but it's very clear that most species remain quite resilient over that time. But there is some concerns about hybrid water milfoil, Eurasian water milfoil that is crossed with northern or good native water milfoil is present in your lake. A detailed study has shown that there is a combination of both pure Eurasian water milfoil and hybrid water milfoil in your lake, and this is something that we're undertaking as part of our control project, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. What's wrong with hybrid water milfoil? Well, I'm going to show you in a little bit, but it grows faster than regular Eurasian water milfoil, and it's harder to kill than regular Eurasian water milfoil. So once again, it's important. That is threatening the health of the lake, and as we know, in some years, especially when water levels are lower and it's exacerbated, that stuff's up at the surface and is probably causing recreational problems, navigational issues, potentially aesthetic issues. So that's what the committee discussed. So we found over the years, there's 46 different native species in your lake. This one right here is a rare one. It's a type of bladderwort. You may see these little pink flowers from time to time. Okay, for all the young ones out there, this plant, see this little thing right here, this little sac? It's got little trigger hairs on it, and if a little critter comes by and tips off the hairs, sucks it up and eats it. Really cool plant, really cool plant. That exists in your lake. We found 4 non-native species, really 3. One is the hybrid water milfoil that we just talked about. Common reed or Phragmites, I'm sure many of you know about that as well. Pale yellow iris on the shorelines, okay? If it's yellow, yeah, it's pretty, but it's not supposed to be there. Only blue irises are supposed to be on our shorelands. If a yellow iris is there, that means it's stepping in the spot of where a blue iris could be, and the yellow irises have reduced function for our ecosystem. They're actually quite a big problem in northern Wisconsin that we're dealing with right now. So if you have them, I would, let's get them out of there. I mean, I wouldn't lose a neighbor over it. If they don't want to do it, it's not the worst plant to have in your lake. But be a good steward and get it out. You can go to a good native plant nursery and put some purple ones in there in their place, and they'll have good habitat value for all your bees and other pollinators, where this one does not. It costs the bee more energy to use the pollen from pale yellow iris than they get out of it in benefit. So while you say, oh, there's a whole bunch of bees all over there, well, yeah, but to extract what they need is really hard for them. And then something called reed canary grass. It's a type of grass. It's in all the ditches up and down. Because of the low water levels, it was on the shoreline in your area, and we thought it important to talk about it in the project. And for the most part, over the years, even though the water levels change, plants seem to grow out to about 19 feet of water in your lake. And within the report, we have different species go out to different depths, but 19 feet is about the maximum depth of growth in your lake. So I'm not going to go over a lot of different metrics and different analyses of why we came up to why the plant community is so good, but here is one. Those are all documented in the report, and you guys can have plenty of opportunity to read that. But this is something called Simpson's diversity, and this looks at both how many species of plants are in your lake and how evenly distributed they are. So think of it like a stock portfolio, and you got thousands and thousands of dollars in stock. You want them dispersed between many different types of stocks as opposed to all in one basket. Enron looked pretty good a bunch of years ago. Well, when that tanks, that is hard on your portfolio. If you have only one species that's the majority of what your plant community is in your lake, and then low water levels, late ice out, hot summer, that plant doesn't do well for whatever reason, and that plant goes away, that can be really hard on your lake. So it's good to have a good even distribution. This is something called a box plot, where this, in lakes in your region, in the north central hardwood forest, this blue dotted line would be the average, 50 percentile, and this would be the 75th and the 25th percentile. So what this shows is that over the years, the diversity has remained almost the same and is above the 75th percentile when compared to other lakes. So you're in the top 25% of lakes in this region for your diversity of plant community. That's fantastic. Want to keep it that way. Plants are important for the lake. I know sometimes they get in our way a little bit, but they really are the foundation, the backbone of the aquatic ecosystem, and what makes our lake a lake and not a swimming pool. We also know there's things called aquatic plant communities that are on the shores of our lakes. Some of those are emergent, shown in green. That's things like cattail and bulrushes, and even the Phragmites that emerges out of the water. You have floating leaf, which is more of this yellow color, which is your lily pads and that type of plant. And what we did is with sub-meter GPS units, we mapped where those conditions exist on the lake. Why is that important? Because I don't know how many times I come to a lake group, especially at the beginning of a project, and they say, we never had lilies out here in this bay, or heck, we used to have bulrushes out there for a mile. Now, this year, we have documented 25.1 acres of where that stuff exists in your lake, and if we do that survey again at a different point in time, we'll be able to know if it changed or stayed the same, and that could tell us something about the health of your lake. If we're seeing a bunch of these plant populations receding, and it's not because of water level, what is it caused by? And that would give us indication. And it's a good survey, and I think a lot of you folks kind of can relate to where those conditions are, the lilies out from the boat landing and so forth. So now let's talk about hybrid water milfoil. And I'll use hybrid water milfoil, or HWM, Eurasian water milfoil, or EWM. I'll kind of use those all interchangeably because the bottom line is that it's in your lake. A combination of both hybrid and pure Eurasian water milfoil. In 2014, this is a map of where we found this plant in your lake. The colors may not show up as good as I would like, but we know that the orange is highly dominant. Red would be surface matted. We didn't have any in 2014, we did in previous years in this same kind of vicinity. And then the gray is more of a scattered or a lighter density. Think of why this is important, because if you have an acre or like a football field of dandelions in, you could have 100 dandelions scattered evenly throughout that football field and you have an acre of dandelions. You could have 10 gazillion dandelions in that same acre and you still have an acre of dandelions. So that's why it's important that we differentiate upon density. It helps paint a better picture, and when we do comparisons from year to year, we can tell that even though the acreage may change, we can see in 2012, right after a big treatment that happened in the spring, there was about 13 acres. 2013, that bounced up to almost 31, and quite a bit of it are these orange and yellows, which are the real bad stuff. And then in 2014, largely probably because of water level increases, we started to see a reduction of the density and the size of the colonies. And however, that's what we can see from the surface and what we can map. The point intercept survey is a survey where you take a rake and you go to a grid of points over the entire lake, and you do that year in and year out. From 2007, 2008, 2009, they were all at zero, even though there was a little milfoil in the lake, just never ended up getting on one of the rake samples. You can see it increased to almost 20% by 2011. A large-scale treatment happened in 2011 that brought it quite low, and I'm going to talk about this. 2013 increased, we see that here. 2014, it slightly increased again, even though this doesn't show that. What does that mean? It's under there, it's still impacting the ecosystem, but it's not impacting our recreation and our use of the lake. We could tolerate it a little bit more because it's not up and right in front of our faces. But the bottom line is that data showed that it's still in the lake, is plentiful of it as it was beforehand. So, with this committee, we discussed various AIS control strategies, and I'm going to go through them for you because many of you may have questions of why did the committee arrive at the process that they did. Because right now, milfoil has been in your lake for a while, and we need to develop a plan for what we're going to do. One thing would be to do nothing, okay? This is no active management. If you do nothing on purpose, it's a management strategy, and that's something that I work with a lot of lake groups, and some of them consider this as what they're going to move forward with. And why? Because in some situations, the population may remain constant and tolerable, and even though there's a threat that plant could go to different lakes, may cause issues, we can't say that it's really causing that much of an issue to the ecology of the system, and in some lakes it stays low in abundance. I'm going to show you some of these data in a little bit. A drawdown. We've done water level drawdowns. Take the water out of the lake up to the maximum depth that that plant grows, it can be very effective, and it's worked quite well on a number of flowage systems. It's not possible on Berry Lake, so crossed it out. Mechanical harvesting, that's where you get one of those weed cutter machines. Maybe you see them out on Shawano Lake. The problem is that it doesn't get rid of it, it just gets rid of your ability to see it, and all those little fragments spread around, and it actually can increase the population within a lake. I work on a lot of lakes where it's everywhere already, and that's a good tool to kind of minimize its problem in the lake. And it's disruptive to native vegetation as well, because the native plants get cut up as well, and some of those plants can't recover from that. Manual removal, we're going to talk about this a little bit in a couple minutes, but that's when a scuba diver goes, pulls the plant out, takes it out of the lake. It can work really, really well, but when you have this much, it's just too much to be realistic to happen. Benthic barriers, this is something that is popular in some parts of Wisconsin, mostly in the southeastern part. What it is, you take a mat, you put it on the ground. If you stake it in, you need a different permit because it's into a lake bed. It can be effective in really small areas, but on a large scale process, it's not recommended because it's really hard on the ecosystem. A lot of the gases and nutrients need to kind of be able to flow from sediment to water. A lot of our critters need to be able to come up and down, and this just blankets, doesn't allow any of that to happen. But it can keep the problem from happening. It can reduce the problems near certain areas of the lake. Biocontrol, there's a milfoil weevil which can eat milfoil, but it's a native insect and it's really not that effective because it's not proven that the DNR doesn't allow it for grant funding. We embarked on a 5-year project with Ontario did with the University of Wisconsin, and the results have indicated that the company that sold the weevils, because of the project, actually discontinued selling the weevils because we found that even though they may add 2,000 weevils to your lake, the background population of weevils is already at like 20,000. So it was just a small drop in the bucket and wasn't having any impact. Hybrid water milfoil is also shown to be less vulnerable to milfoil weevils because it's got a thicker stem part where the weevils would need to crawl into the plant. So unfortunately, while it would seem so nice and easy if we could just add some bugs to the lake and be done with it, that silver bullet really isn't there. And then something that you folks have been involved with in the past, herbicide treatment can be costly. It can be effective when properly planned. It can be ineffective when not properly planned. I would say that I'm not going out on a limb, but there's probably more ineffective treatments statewide than there are effective treatments for Eurasian water milfoil. There's collateral impact to native vegetation. We would be naive to think that we could put an herbicide, something that kills plants, into the lake, and it would just miraculously only kill the plant that we want it to kill. There are many ways that we try to minimize that collateral impact, but there's only so much we can do. And then there's something called when we do a little spot treatment versus when we want to target the system wide as a whole. So, this is what's in everybody's mind when they think of Eurasian water milfoil. I mean, bad news. Traditionally, we, collective scientific community, thought we needed to control aquatic invasive species at all costs because this could happen to your lake. But what we found is it's really not that simple. So I want to go through a little bit of an explanation of what we came up with, okay? So this is hypothetical. This is just, in general, we know that Eurasian water milfoil, unmanaged, meaning no treatment. It can go from low to high, and then it fluctuates from year to year, and that's just what it does, and that's its equilibrium if we don't do anything about it. We see on some lakes that equilibrium is in the 20 and 30% and fluctuates from year to year. Some years some lakes it just goes all the way up to 50% and stays at that level. As a reminder, right now you guys are in this 10% range. So this equilibrium is at a 20% of the lake range. That's a lot of milfoil, but you can see there's also lakes like Hancock that just for some reason don't get bad. This is frequency of occurrence, so the same point intercept grid, and this is part of the long-term project that Berry Lake is also a part of. So, hypothetically, we would think that an unmanaged would go up, we would intervene, say with an herbicide treatment, knock the population down, maybe try to hand harvest and retain, another herbicide treatment. Over time, we would try to keep the population at this lower level. We're not going to get rid of it, and if we stop doing treatments or hand harvesting periodically, it's going to go back up to this unmanaged level, bottom line. And here's some lakes that I work on. Catherine Lake, Sandbar Lake, I mean, you're at the 40-50%, do big treatments and bring it down. And then Catherine Lake, we're at 2015 now, is up over here, and they're going to be doing another whole lake treatment because they don't want to let it get to this level again. This is what management of Eurasian water milfoil looks like. This is something we wanted to bring you, this audience, to. So this is what we get for doing that, active management. And we know that, we want to keep the AIS population low, but we also know that the management itself can be hard on the lake. So that's why it's important to monitor the lake, and it's make sure to do things properly and plan it out. We want to keep the AIS low so it doesn't cause recreation, navigation, aesthetic issues. Many of you folks here, this is what we're most concerned about. Me as a scientist, I'm a little more concerned about this to make sure the ecosystem's functioning. But we also don't want that stuff causing problems and hurting the values of our properties around the lake. So, and in some lakes, the unmanaged EWM population is not that high. It doesn't cause us that much problems. We know that on your lake that's maybe not the case because we've seen it at those high levels. And then be good stewards. There's lakes in the area that don't have this stuff, and a boat from your lake is what they're worried about when they're monitoring their boat landing. So they say, you guys should help us out by not having it in your lake. That would help us out. So, and then we know that in some cases the management plan may not be fully supported. Question everybody's going to ask me, are herbicides safe? And this is the one slide that I'm just going to show, is that the EPA, when it allows registration of herbicides, it says that the benefits outweigh the risks. And that's something that we make decisions every day in our daily life about benefits and risks. Think of the new report about how bad Tylenol can be for our stomachs and everything like that. I mean, we use the appropriate dose, and we make sure that the benefits outweigh the risks. So no pesticide is considered safe. Remember, pesticides are all the things from fungicides to insecticides to things that kill rats. I mean, we're talking about a select group of pesticides called herbicides, things that kill plants. And because they're specifically designed to target the control of plants, there's not as much impact on non-plants as when you get into some of these insecticides. Think, if it's strong enough to kill a cockroach, what else could it do, right? So it's something to keep in mind as well. So on your lake, you guys did a couple spot treatments up to 2011 with a granular 2,4-D product, and then in 2012 we coordinated something more of a whole lake or a coordinated approach. I want to go through just a little bit about what a spot treatment is, and this is when you have some plants and you target an area, and it's actually the water surface, and it has a water depth, and this right here is the volume. And when you set up parts per million, you're trying to get this area full of the herbicide. And what's the problem? Is that there's no sides on these treatments. And it just dissipates so darn fast that it's hard for those to be effective. And we've actually shown through research that we just published with the Army Corps and the DNR, I personally did, that it's really hard, and most of the time doing spot treatments are hard. And this is to be effective, because this is what happens. You target a little spot in a big old lake, and think of it as food coloring, but it's just herbicide. You put a really high dose right here, but it dissipates out of there so fast, and while its goal is to reach equilibrium, or a constant dose within the whole lake, and it will be the same dose here as here 2 days after the treatment, but that level will be so low that it won't even be detected. And that's I remember in graduate school, one of my professors said, the solution to pollution is dilution. And that's what happens here. It just completely dilutes. But if you have enough of these sites at that same dose, the cumulative impact will eventually turn the lake, and I don't know if you can see, but a pinkish color. And that's what we call a whole lake treatment. That's, instead of trying to get a high dose for a short amount of time, we try to get a lower dose, 10-fold less in fact, for a longer period of time until that herbicide not dissipates through the lake, but over time it degrades, it breaks into non-herbicide components. That's usually about, let's see if that comes up. That's usually, we look at the 0 to 7 day average, but it's usually about 14 to 21 days before that herbicide completely degrades. So if we use this in the parts per billion range, super duper duper low, and we can get it to maintain for 7 to 14 days, that's a different way to control aquatic plants on the lake. And what we've shown is that this can be very effective on milfoil, and it's less hard on your native plants as well, because the dose is so low, some of those plants can really get through it. So here is Eurasian water milfoil on some lakes. So we measured the water, we measured the herbicide in the water from these lakes. This is 0 to 7 day average, and you can see if we got in the 0.4 parts per million, we're getting 90 to 100% control. If we're closer to this 0.2, you can see 50% control. And these data show that if we're in this range above 0.4, high level of control, but we're starting to damage our native plants. If we go over here, we're getting seasonal and low impact, so this is really our focus area when doing these types of treatments. So we're basing our dose information off of good science. This is Eurasian water milfoil. However, the green, or the purple triangles, is hybrid water milfoil. Let me go through this just quickly here. At 0.3 to 0.4, which is our sweet spot, with the reds, we're getting 90 to 100% control. You can see we're more like 20 to 70% control with the hybrid water milfoils.
How deep could it grow?
Eurasian water milfoil in your lake can probably go to about 15 feet. But in other lakes that are clear, we have it growing out in excess of 20 feet, say in Lake Matunga. So it can grow quite deep. So what this shows is that hybrid water milfoil is a difficult bugger to impact. And right here is what we targeted the Eastern Basin treatment at in 2012. And you can see it kind of fell in between the purples and the reds. Well, that makes sense because we have half purples and half reds in your lake roughly. So that makes sense of why we got that amount of control. Right here, so the dark red is how much Eurasian water milfoil was in that Eastern Basin, and the pink was in the Western Basin. And here is 2011, treatment happened in the spring of 2012. You can see it went down to 2% after the treatment, and almost no native plant impacts were noted with that treatment. The unfortunate part was that there was rebound relatively quickly. That means some of those plants probably didn't get completely killed. They were able to grow through it. And that might be because, look, we were over at this 0.2 to 0.3, when really we wanted to be a 0.3 to 0.4. Just a little, I mean, we almost got it, is what happened. So we're kind of coming up to the end here, but I want to show you that the bottom line that the committee came up with is if we want to do something, and that may or may not need to happen, but if we want to reduce the hybrid water milfoil in your lake, a whole lake treatment is the only tool that can do that. It's the only tool. We looked at every other option, so pretty much on the table is do nothing or do a whole lake treatment. And that's what we came down to. Herbicide use is not without concerns. Native plant impacts underscores the importance of monitoring. As we showed with the last treatment, the native plants did really, really well following that. They may get dinged up the year of the treatment, but they rebound quite nicely. There's some fisheries concerns. What does that mean? It's not that the fish would be impacted by the herbicide, because that's not the case. But if we take out a bunch of plants that the fish need to spawn and hide, it's really when the emerged fry come out, that might be a problem because that's not there. So fisheries managers don't like to see big treatments year after year after year in case there is a lower year class, because a lot of little fish get picked off one year because there's not a lot of hiding places. And then things like social support. Herbicides are not without social complications of their use. And a lot of people like politics have a lot of different opinions about that. If an herbicide treatment is planned, well, what will we use too? And the reason we brought this up during our committee meetings is because hybridity, 2,4-D, which is historically and traditionally used, hybrid water milfoil is a little bit more tolerant to that. So what does that mean? You need a higher dose to kill your plants. At a higher dose, you could be getting in that threshold where our native plant community maybe not be able to get through that. Resistance. This is something that if you're a farmer, you know a lot about. If you use the same herbicide year after year, what you do is any plants that remain, so think of your Asian water milfoil, we did a big treatment with 2,4-D, just a couple made it through. The ones that made it through for some reason were able to make it through. Now they're the plant that remakes the whole population, so now you have only a species that can make it through those treatments. Over time, there's something called resistance that builds up when you do treatments with the same herbicide year after year. I'm on the board of the Midwest Aquatic Plant Management Society, and this is something that organization is really concerned with, because a lot of times DNR really wants things like 2,4-D to be used because it's cheaper and they know a lot about it. However, if you're not rotating your herbicide use patterns, you may be causing a super strand of this Eurasian water milfoil. It's not something we want to worry about. Here's the goals. The goals, and this is going to be a little bit lengthier list, but we want to control the existing and prevent further aquatic invasive species within Berry Lake. The first goal is to initiate large-scale herbicide control strategy targeting hybrid water milfoil on Berry Lake. Explore benthic mats, probably after treatments are effective in certain areas of the lake, to see if that's something that landowners can do. Reduce Phragmites and pale yellow iris. Enhance volunteers' ability, especially for pale yellow iris and Phragmites. Help us learn where those are around the lake. And clean boats, clean waters inspections at the public boat landing. And we also discussed working with the local fire departments to institute best management practices for the dry hydrant use. What that means is you have a dry hydrant at your boat landing. The fire department needs water from your lake for a fire. They go there and they get it, and we want to make sure that there's no water that they just got in Shawano from Shawano and that spilled into your lake a little bit in the process. So we want to make sure that, think of how much water that is and how many zebra mussel little larvae could be in there. And it's just a common practice. There shouldn't be any outflow, but at times there could be, and we just want to make sure that we address this within the management plan. I'm not going to talk about all the rest of these. If you have questions afterwards, come up to me, but they're well documented. I just want to talk just a little bit about this. When we asked stakeholders about what were their top concerns regarding Berry Lake, AIS was by far the top. When we asked, do you believe aquatic plant control is needed on Berry Lake? You can see 44 plus 41, you can do the math, it's a lot. Okay, a lot of people think that aquatic plant control is needed on the lake. And when we talked about what was the level of support for the responsible use of herbicide treatments, you can see that there was quite a bit, almost 50%, it was actually 49 point something percent were supportive of herbicide use, and only 20% roughly were unsupportive, with a lot of people needing more information. And that's one of the reasons why at this meeting I tried to give some people that information to help maybe, because it seems like they wanted it, and that's one of the purposes here. and in conjunction with being able to have this on your YouTube page to be able to reach a larger audience, this is something that the committee decided would be a good way to help address this this issue. So, yes, sir.
I think I have a solution.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
We should stop Berry Lake with sharks, and people could stop worrying about zebra mussels and milfoil.
In light of Shark Week, I think that is a good idea. But they won't make it, unfortunately, unless we add salt. I have 2 more slides. Why don't we hit my last couple slides, and then we can have some time for conversation. So, when we're going to monitor this herbicide treatment, we just want to give you guys a little bit of background about what that entails. Year of treatment. Right now, this is tentatively set at next year. Okay, that would be the year of treatment. The year before treatment, therefore, would be this year. And then the year after the treatment, well, you can do the math, 2015, 2016, 2017. All 3 years, a point intercept plant survey would be done. As John mentioned, the DNR did this one. That DNR program is now not in the budget anymore. So these point intercept surveys would be something that Ontario would be picking up, but it would be the same methodology. So we'd have a year before, a year of, and a year after. The year of is really a couple months after the treatment, so sometimes assessing the full what's going on with the plants, it's a little bit too early to tell. So that's why the year after the treatment's really the proof in the pudding. We'll do the mapping survey, so we can show the map and get everybody, so people will know. Something that we've already done a little bit on your lake, but it's called an acoustic survey. And what that is new bathymetry for your lake. With the changing water levels, we need to know how deep your lake is, how much water is in the lake, how much water is in this top mixing zone, because that's what our decisions about how much herbicide need to be put in the lake are based upon. Just a side note, our company doesn't do any herbicide treatments, so that would be something that you guys would contract through a professional. That allows us, when we're assessing the treatment and planning the treatment, to not have any skin in the game, to really be able to say whether it worked or not. Because if it doesn't work, we want to know that and know what to do. Part of this acoustic survey too, this is Berry Lake, and I use this in a lot of presentations to show people. This is a heat map of where the vegetation exists in your lake from 2013 and 2014. No treatment happened. Water level changes were a little bit different, but you can see where plant abundance change. It's not Eurasian water milfoil, it's just plants, any type of plants. This is important for fisheries managers to understand the habitat of the lake. It's also going to be important if we can see that it goes from a lot of red before the treatment to almost no red after the treatment. That would show us that even though our native plants maybe got dinged up a little bit more from a fisheries perspective, something that's important when monitoring this type of thing. So that is in the project for all 3 years. And then during the year of the treatment, water samples would be taken at various locations and time periods after the treatment and tested for how much herbicide are in the lake, so we'll know exactly how much is there and when it degraded to zero, because that's important for us to understand if something was to be done again, what different would happen, what actually existed in the lake. As John mentioned, the Berry Lake Property Owners Association was successful in getting a DNR AIS control grant in probably the most competitive grant cycle ever. I mean, it is fantastic that you folks were able, as a little lake with not a lot of access opportunities, to able to get some state funds. It's really a test of some of the things that we put into that project. The grant rankings are based on questions about type of lake, what the project entails, and that was included within the project and was awarded funding. We went in for 4 years and they only gave us 3 years, and we changed the project around a little bit, but we think it's a successful program and we'll take it. So here is what the dollars and cents are going to look like. 2015, year prior to treatment. These are the costs. These are almost all monitoring and planning costs, because we want to monitor, pre-treatment data set, and then we want to make sure that we plan it right, and if it's ready to go or if it's not. The year of the treatment, obviously there's some higher costs. We've budgeted for about $23,000 for the treatment itself. Based on what our planning, that number may change. Based on when that goes out to a competitive bid for applicators, that may change. But that's $23,000 for the treatment. The year after the treatment, this also includes $4,000 for professionals to come out and scuba dive and hand harvest any remaining milfoil that may exist in the system. Kind of an integrated approach of using both herbicides and trying to use hand harvesting right away to keep that population down. Perhaps this won't be needed, perhaps less of it will be needed, perhaps maybe a little bit more. And then after this, we're going to do a little update to the Eurasian water milfoil control strategy. Essentially, meet with that same committee again. What did we learn? Did we learn that we did good? Did we do bad? Do we want to do it again? Do we want to never do it again? We have some money in there to have some meetings and discuss this because we need to know, we need to learn and develop a new plan. So this is what the cost of this 3-year project is likely to be. The state has given us this amount of money for this part, and that's 65%. As John mentioned, this would be your share, but we think this 65 can go closer to 60% if we get good volunteer presentation at the boat landings and those other things. But essentially, this 3.5-year project will cost this amount of money. And with the amount of money that the town is giving, that is a good start. We also have this $41,000 from the state as a contingency plan in case this $23,000 treatment wasn't as effective as needed. We're going to go in kind of a little bit on the low side because we want to make sure that we don't harm our native plants is our primary goal, because in lakes where we've overdosed, it takes a number of years for those plants to come back, and that's hard on the lake. We want to go from the little bit more conservative and learn, and that could be to conduct a treatment in 2018, or we can extend the project and use that money to continually monitor, to do hand harvesting for 4 or 5 years. The DNR doesn't want that money back. They're going to allow us to extend the project to utilize it. What does this mean? The Berry Lake Property Owners Association is got a lot of money from the state of Wisconsin to do good science and to do good planning for Eurasian water milfoil for 3 to whatever, 5, 7 years potentially on the lake. One of the things we may want to do, and we've done on a lot of lakes, including I work on Shawnee Lake, is we can take those plants from your lake, grow them in labs, and give them different doses of herbicide and see what they respond the best to. It's an expensive process, but it's something that the committee has discussed and likes the idea, and if the 2016 treatment isn't effective, that would be the first next step to look at. We've also developed a couple final goals that don't really fit into the main framework. Is we want to increase the association's capacity to communicate with other management partners of the lake. We want to use education as a way to portray some of this information. And there's a big list of different educational topics that we want to discuss that the committee is committed to helping allow people to understand. We want to start making sure that on a regular basis the association is discussing and actively engaged with various management entities from the system, and increase volunteerism. It's hard. We burn ourselves out by monitoring the boat landings and doing this and that, but it's important for the health of the lake. It's important to reduce the cost of the project. Maybe look more at a door-to-door campaign, talk to our neighbors. Something that we've developed as part of this project that may get initiated is something called a fair share program. I don't know what it would be, but on some lakes they've had good success. They say if you can contribute, your family contributes 10 hours of volunteer work a year, or an extra $50 if you can't do 10%, you go into the Fair Share Club, and then you can highlight those people, list the names in a newsletter, give another accolade, and that'll give people the opportunity that, hey, I can't monitor the boat landing, but I can give you $50. You can use that to go hire some kids to go monitor the boat landing, and that could have the same means to the same end. And with that, I will take any questions about sharks or otherwise. Yes, sir.
Does Ontario have any idea why the majority of our invasive milfoil species, etc., according to the map, is concentrated in the northeast section of the lake?
I think that I would not say that it's because of the boat landing, even though a lot of people will say, oh, it's because the boat landing's there. What that is that's the most logical reason, because it's probably the closest to the infestation point. But when it's been in your lake for as long as it has, it's probably more related to the conditions of that basin. Maybe it's the right sediment consistency at the right depth is probably what I'm thinking, because that is where that deeper hole is. And when you have a deeper hole, you get a ledge effect. We have this really organic matter, this real soft kind of stuff right around that ring, and that seems to be where that is. The Western Basin also has a really strong aquatic plant population, and maybe that's doing good. Like it's a basketball player really boxing out the Eurasian water milfoil from taking hold in that area. Those would be the two reasons that I would likely think that are the most likely. But the boat landing, a lot of people think that, oh, because the boat landing's there, that's the most likely. It is the most likely introduction space. Maybe it's been there a little bit longer, but there's been fragments in your lake floating around in that Western Basin that if they wanted to take root, they would have.
The first watercraft is required to go counterclockwise.
Mhm.
So they go on boat landing, they're going to turn right. They're not going to go across the lake.
Right.
And then in low water, they can't do it because of the problem with in front of Baldwin's there. But they go right, they can be dropping off what they want right there as soon as they get in the water.
Right. We have to remember there's a couple principles here. Is that one, these plants spread primarily through fragmentation, and in absence of boat traffic, they spread up a storm too. Because what happens is that plant is growing, and it says it's time for me to spread. It starts growing little roots off of it, and then it breaks up, and this happens typically at 3 distinct points of time in the year. It's called autofragmentation, and then they float away. And those plants are hundreds of times more likely to produce an actual plant than when you cut it off with a boat before those roots are all made. So the school of thought is, I think that while it's good to keep boat traffic out of areas with high Eurasian water milfoil, it's going to spread on its own. There may be something to why there is less there, but there are some pretty dense areas in the Western Basin, particularly along like the beach area of this camp, where there's probably a lot of disturbance. And that disturbance, think of your yard and you till up your grass. What comes back? Not the pretty flowers, right? All the thistles and the dandelions and the junk, all those really invasive plants, because they like that new disturbed habitat. When you have disturbance on a lake, that's the first place that Eurasian water milfoil goes in. But I don't have a complete answer. The 2012 treatment looked at just treating the eastern basin in that whole lake scale, and it was pretty effective. But this time, the committee thought it important to target the system as a whole instead of just the eastern basin. Yes, sir.
The personal watercraft, we have heard from other presentations that 10 feet and under, and you're going fast speed, you rip the plants right out of the ground. Is that true or not true?
I don't know exactly what depth it is, but personal watercraft, they do put out a high amount of disturbance. One of the problems with personal watercrafts is they can go into shallower water, so then they can really cause the impact. I don't know about water depth, but there's a good study out by Tim Asplund that talks exactly about water depth, and I was very surprised. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it a lot of people used to think that, oh, you know, a boat that's going a little bit slower creates more of a wake. It's not really about the wake, it's about the energy underneath it. And faster means more potential for uprooting plants and causing sediment resuspension. And those little PWCs can go fast. And I think that's the issue, is the speed.